Is our fascination with celebrity culture hurting the church? Rather than questioning mainstream celebrity culture, have Christians merely mimicked it and as a result failed to follow the example and teachings of Jesus? My guest today, Katelyn Beaty, has written a fascinating book. We had her on our Think Biblically podcast to discuss, and I enjoyed it so much I thought, you know what, my YouTube audience has got to get challenged by this. It's called Celebrities for Jesus: How Personas, Platforms, and Profits Are Hurting the Church. Katelyn, thanks for joining me a second time.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Sean. It's good to see you again.
Well, let's jump right in. And I imagine some people watching this are thinking, you know what? I'm not a celebrity. So why should I, a non-celebrity, care about this phenomenon that seems to be about other people?
Yeah, well, because celebrities wouldn't exist without us. They wouldn't
Hmm.
exist without our attention, our money in church communities. They wouldn't exist without an audience or members saying, this is the person that we're going to follow and pay attention to. When I'm on social media, thinking about the attention economy, who am I spending my minutes scrolling through their old photos on Instagram? So we participate in celebrity culture, even if we are not ourselves celebrities,
Hmm.
because celebrities wouldn't exist without our attention and adoration.
That's fair. And you also talk later about how you think celebrity culture mars the image of God in both celebrities and non-celebrities. We'll come back to that. But maybe let's just start with your story behind writing this book. Because I know every book I've written, it's a labor of love. There's got to be an energy and a passion to do it. So what
Mhm.
motivated you to write about celebrities for Jesus?
I've spent my whole career in Christian publishing, first at a journalistic publication where we were reporting on trends in the church. Now I work in Christian book publishing. And so both experiences have given me kind of a bird's eye view on trends in the American church. And
Mm.
this book really started when I was working at the magazine, and we were getting so many tips and allegations about the famous Christian leaders, pastors, evangelists, authors, household names. And those were just so discouraging to get, of
Mm.
course, and thinking, okay, is there something about their celebrity status that is preventing them from being held accountable, that allowed them to abuse power in a particular way? I currently work in book publishing. I see the ways that questions around platform and pedestal seem to crowd out other really important decisions. So I wanted to get behind the headlines, behind my daily work, and say, is celebrity baked into the culture of the American church? And if so, what negative effects has it had? And how can we kind of detox from those negative effects?
That's such a good question. You say, is it baked in? Which means it's probably in ways we don't see that it affects us subtly and powerfully. We're going to come to that, but I'm sure some people are watching this going, okay, time out, Sean. You write books, you speak, you have a YouTube channel. Some people might consider you a type of Christian celebrity. Here you have on a guest who's written a book coming on your show to promote her book. How
Hmm.
can the two of you come on and critique celebrity culture and participate in it? Now, I know you've thought about this and you talk about it in your book, but tell me
Hmm.
how you kind of reconcile that seeming tension.
Yes. I get this question a lot. And honestly, I haven't reconciled it entirely, because I
Hmm.
think that the work of promoting a book, of doing media appearances, you're at least swimming in the waters of celebrity. So I think at the very least, it takes a real searching of one's heart and motives and desires to say, what am I doing this for? What is the thing behind the thing? I've had to ask myself that as I launch this book. Is it that I want to point people to this work because I want to help people? I want to
Hmm.
inform people. I want to start important conversations. Or is there a part of me that wants a kind of ego gratification, self glory, attention? Those are questions that I think all of us who have any kind of public platform are playing with the tools of mass media on a regular basis. We have to interrogate within ourselves. So I haven't resolved that tension. And I think, the first step it would be easy for me to say, oh, but I'm not a celebrity because I don't have this many followers, or I haven't,
Mm-hmm.
most people don't know, I'm not a household name, blah, blah, blah. But, it's easy to compare and say, well, I'm not as big as this person, so I don't have to think about these dynamics. I can just kind of check out. And I think it really has to start with, no, I'm at least swimming in these waters. And so I have to pay attention to my own motives. I do at the end of the day. I mean, I am a writer, journalist, book author. So, of course, I believe in the value of communication to connect with people, to shape
Mm.
hearts and minds. The tools of mass media we have today allow us to connect with and communicate with many more people than we could in, a typical day in our lives in an embedded community. So I definitely am appreciative of the tools of mass media. I also think they come with significant
Mm.
tensions or temptations that if you're using them, you have to wade into.
Let's talk about that. I think these kind of tools are morally neutral. I don't think it's sinful to have a YouTube channel, or I wouldn't be on YouTube. I don't think it's sinful to write a book, to use TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is. But you make the
Hmm.
point that they're not neutral in terms of affecting the message, and not
Hmm.
neutral in terms of affecting us. So
Hmm.
what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, social media, but also, television, radio, really the digital media that has been part of our world, at least for the last 100 years, going on a century. We tend to engage this media as forms of entertainment and consumption. So, or distraction. So, if you're thinking about using these tools of media to communicate a spiritual message for Christians, maybe you want to use these tools to share the gospel with a lot of people. You can't disconnect the medium from the message.
Mm.
If you are a televangelist and people are hearing you and watching you preach the gospel in between watching The Price is Right and the nightly news, and I'm trying to think of shows that have been on for a long time,
Sure,
CSI,
sure.
um, people are going to receive that gospel in a specific way. The fact that they're probably alone at home, they're disconnected from a larger community.
Mm.
TV is kind of, as in its very nature, intended to entertain and distract us. So, how is the gospel shaped because of the medium itself? These are just questions that we have to be mindful of, that the medium changes how people receive the message. If I'm thinking about, sharing the gospel on TikTok, think about the attention span that
Mm-hmm.
TikTok feeds and kind of anticipates. I don't watch much TikTok because I'm an older millennial and it intimidates me. But when I do, I'm watching a video for maybe 10, 15 seconds. Like, it is really quick. This is not a medium that encourages deep thought, that encourages sitting with something and really mulling it over. So we
Mm.
just have to be mindful of the fact that, if we want people to encounter God in Christ, to hear the gospel, I do wonder if in person communication, if not that, then at least the written word is perhaps more truthful to the depth of the
Mm.
content that we're providing than some of these other media.
What you've done so far in this interview, you do in your book, is you don't pretend to have it all figured out. You're still living within this tension, and you're asking the right questions. That's all I'm asking my viewers to do, and I appreciate that you do that in your book as well. Now, you mentioned TikTok, and we've talked about YouTube a little bit. We're on YouTube. But my question
Mhm.
is, do you think celebrity has changed? Because I wonder if this book would have been possible 10 or 20 years ago when there were gatekeepers to being a celebrity. You had to
Mhm.
work through certain channels typically to get there. Now, in a sense, somebody can become TikTok famous overnight,
Mhm.
YouTube famous overnight. In a sense, if we're all kind of celebrities in our own mind, if we just have more followers on any platform than people we follow. So, do you think the nature of celebrity has changed? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going back to TikTok, Instagram Reels. I'll come across something, or a friend will share something with me and it's somebody I've never heard of. And, thinking more traditionally, you might think, well, what are their credentials, or were they trained, or who can
Right,
vouch for
right.
them? And it literally doesn't matter. In
Mm,
most of the worlds of social media, they provide a kind of democratized path to influence. Now, influence is different from leadership. And
mm,
I tend to think that in terms of lasting cultural change and the formation of persons, that is going to happen in a deep way within institutions. I write in the book about the decline in institutions, a distrust in
mm-hmm.
institutions. Most institutions in the United States are facing a crisis at the deepest levels, and in that decline, you have the rise of the authority of charismatic individuals. And so social media rewards that. We watch people who entertain us, who entrance us, who have something really pithy to say. And so, yeah, 10 pre social media, at least, 15, 20 years ago, if you wanted to become a best-selling book author, if you wanted to become even a musician or an actor, well, you had to have the right connections. You had to have somebody kind of vouch for your work, for your skill, for your training. Today, we have more like the reward of somebody's attention, and that attention
Mm,
leading to a growing number of followers. And I don't know if this is good or bad, because in some ways I think, well, maybe social media actually allow people who would have been ignored, or
mm,
um, not had access to those traditional channels of credibility in the past. Maybe this is an easier path for them. And yet, of course, I think just in terms of book publishing, about the fact that today, if you have so many TikTok followers, you'll probably get a book deal, whether or not you can write. Well,
mm-hmm.
because we'll figure that out later.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are a very good and skilled writer who has taken years to practice and hone the craft of writing, but you don't have much of a platform to speak of, you're going to have a really hard time publishing a book. And I don't think that that's right. It seems like we've gotten off kilter some
Mm.
way if we're thinking about book publishing using those metrics.
I didn't tell you this last time, but I really appreciate the emphasis on institutions. One thing my father's done is he stayed committed to Cru, Camps Crusade for Christ, where he didn't have to, but the accountability and the partnership built into that organization. I'm wearing my Biola shirt, in many ways use a lot of the platform God has given me to try to prop up what I think Biola is doing good. That's one piece you talk about amidst this that's important. Now we're going to come back to some of the other pieces, but maybe it'd be helpful if you make a distinction between fame and
Mhm.
between celebrity. So maybe what are some of the what are the difference there, and maybe some of the positives or negatives more tied to celebrity than fame.
Yeah, well, I tend to think of fame as something that has always been with us. Like in
Hmm.
any time and place, there have been people whose, traditionally family lineage, military conquests, creative accomplishments, sometimes virtue, a virtuous life, all of that draws a kind of renown. People start paying attention to your life story, to your work. And thinking about fame as a Christian, fame can come to you without you seeking it, kind
Hmm.
of as a byproduct of otherwise really good things. And then the question is, well, how do I steward this well? Now that I have this kind of platform or spotlight, are there things that I can highlight? Are there causes that I can advance because I have this attention, basically, because I have this renown? So I tend to think of fame at least neutrally, if not positively, as long as it is kind of the byproduct of a life well
Hmm.
lived rather than the thing itself.
Okay.
Celebrity, by contrast, is a modern phenomenon in that it inherently relies on the tools of mass media to project an image. I tend to think that celebrity is more about an image of the person as being impressive, attractive, smart, like whatever it is, the thing that we want to believe about ourselves. The tools of celebrity allow us to project that kind of image. And so people are paying attention less to your work or what you're putting out in the world as they are to who you are, and wanting to form a kind of attachment or adoration to you. And this is why I write in the book that celebrity tends to turn people into idols. Idols is a
Mm,
Christian theological term, basically something or someone who replaces God as the Lord of our lives and our allegiances and affections. And it is, when we see funerals of celebrities televised, or we read the tabloid news, it doesn't take long to see the ways that there is a kind of attachment and fascination that at least borders on idolatry in
mm,
our attachment to celebrity figures, who we have to remember are people,
mm,
and an idol can distort that reality. We place too much of our devotion, our attention, our affections onto somebody who, in most cases, we can't know, we don't know in any real way. We expect too much of them. We kind of forget that they go through life as embodied beings just like the rest of us. They
mm,
have basic human needs for care and belonging and love. And I just tend to think that celebrity dynamics crowd that out. They
mm,
put too much of a burden on other people to carry for us some ultimate sense of meaning and connection. And that's why it's destructive, whether it's happening in the church or
mm,
outside of it. Celebrity also, one reason I think it's more dangerous than fame is that it tends to isolate people. I defined
mm,
celebrity as social power without proximity.
mm,
And as God's image bearers, I believe we are all intended to live our lives in community where we can be seen and known, kind of doing daily life with other people. And celebrity can often have a distancing effect where the more that people know of me, or as my star rises, the fewer people can actually really just know me as me. And so in that distance and in that lack of proximity can come all sorts of temptations and
mm.
ways that people cope with the loneliness of it.
I appreciate that you talk about how destructive and damaging it is. In a minute, I want you to talk about why it's so alluring. But I've got to bring something superhero in. It just happens on my shows. Big superhero fan. Is when I was reading your book, I was thinking of the serum that Captain America was given in Captain America 1. And the people that were going to make him into a super soldier very carefully wanted to choose somebody who had character, because what the serum would do was exacerbate traits that were already there. We see another
Hmm.
character, Abomination, take it, and it turns him into an ultimate bad guy because those seeds were planted in his heart. Now, we typically
Hmm.
talk about the temptations, power, sex, and money, as being the three
Hmm.
big ones. In your
Hmm.
book, you cover all three. So it almost made me think, does that make celebrity even more powerful than any individual one in terms of the temptation? Because there's
Mm.
abuses by Christians on all three levels. So
Hmm.
do you agree that
Hmm.
it draws out what is potentially existing already there? And is it as dangerous or more dangerous because it has all of those components combined?
Mm. That's so fascinating. Yeah, well, I mean, if your name is Abomination, probably things aren't going to work out well for you. It's like kind of in your name. You probably have some bad stuff in your heart. But that's a really good point, Sean, that in so many of these stories of celebrity power gone wrong, we see a misuse of money, sex, and power. We see taking advantage of other people. We see a kind of controlling, bullying behavior. We see the misuse of finances that other people are giving, intending the money for ministry, and instead it's used for the pastor to buy a Lamborghini or whatever it is. Um, I tend to think that one of the reasons it is so dangerous is because we have not really properly examined the nature of power. And
Mm,
we tend to think that I'm a good person. Of course, I have accountability. I've been to seminary. I've done the work to examine my heart, and I can kind of reach for this tool and use it for good purposes, not recognizing that so often when we grasp for power, we've already lost, you know?
Hmm.
And that's not me saying that no one can be empowered. I believe that there are people called to positions of leadership and authority, who shape our institutions, who shape our common life together. Um, but just recognizing that, I tend to trust people in power who I see want to use their power to serve rather than to
Hmm.
be served. And so maybe what
Hmm.
you're identifying is if there's already an inclination toward self-serving, toward ego, um, toward getting other people to do what you want, that's just going to be amplified by any kind of
Hmm.
celebrity you add into the mix. That is going to increase the capacity for someone to follow the designs of their heart that are already there. And there's just going to be exacerbated. And in a lot of these cases, unfortunately, you have communities and systems built up around somebody who don't offer restraint, who don't
Hmm.
say, this is leading to some behaviors we're seeing that concern us, or be careful. Instead, oftentimes the communities and systems around the person are like, well, our ministry is growing, our church is growing, this is working, this is successful, we derive a sense of our own importance and mission from our attachment to you, so go for it. There are not proper restraints to kind of curtail a misuse of power in the beginning. And so
Hmm.
ultimately these stories of celebrity gone wrong are not just about individuals. I mean, of course they are about
That's good.
individuals being people of character or not, but they are also about communities that enable them or disable them to act on, you know,
Hmm.
malformed desires and purposes.
You talk a lot about the bigger stories that have been in the news, whether it's Mark Driscoll, whether it's the Willow Creek uh, with Bill Hybels, RZIM. There's a ton of lessons to be learned from this, but one of them, as an apologist, watching the Ravi Zacharias story unfold, was one of the big takeaways I've told people. I've said, if you could go back 5 years and ask any apologist who they would want to be,
Hmm.
probably a majority would say Ravi. I mean, he sold
Mhm.
probably millions of books, huge
Mhm.
hits, speaking around the world, has a massive organization named after him, respect, meeting with government leaders, all the things we would think that would make a life significant. And the reality is, he must have internally been just completely torn, knowing he was a fraud, and ended
Mhm.
up hurting more people than he helped. So part of my
Mhm.
warning to people is to say, if you think these kinds of things, big followings, name recognition, is going to make you happy, it's actually the opposite. It's probably
Mhm.
because if that's why you go into it, I think it's setting up a false allure of love and acceptance, like you talk about. So when you don't
Mhm.
get it, it's going to make things worse. I'm partly curious
Mhm.
if you agree with that, and if you could just talk about what you talk about in the book that I love so much, is that part of the allure of celebrity is just people want to be respected, they want to be loved, and they think getting these followings and this name is going to fill up their hearts, but it doesn't.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'm moved to hear you reflect on the story of Ravi, and it was heartbreaking to get tips about that story actually years
Mm,
before the story came out. It was devastating. I wouldn't have considered myself like a Ravi fan, but I read his books in college. I listened to some of his talks. I respected him. I think you're absolutely right that
mm,
if you're not content with the small following, you actually won't be content with the big following.
mm,
If you can't accept a limited scope of influence, if that's not enough to say, I trust that God has put me in this place for a reason, for a purpose. I trust that whatever happens, rising or falling, I'm content with that because my identity and self worth is not derived from external validation. It's not derived from external growth and praise. It's derived from my identity in Christ. And so that means you can be content with the small things. You could be okay with the big things, just kind of knowing that you can practice a healthy detachment because you're not looking to those exterior things for kind of ultimate worth. And I've had to remind myself of that even in launching this book, which is terribly ironic and strange, but thinking about sales and book promotion and why isn't it at this level, and we can all kind of want more, and then having to step back and say, Katelyn, this is not about you. If God wants to do something with this book, God will do something with this book. Trust the outcomes and the results to him. And just, it's so much freer. It's so liberating to not have to look to external things for a sense of self-worth. I think absolutely people turn to celebrity because they think it will give them those things, those ultimate things, ultimate sense of meaning and purpose and value. And if that's what you're looking for, I don't think you're ever really going to be content, because you can always find someone who has more followers than you.
Exactly.
Or who is smarter or more beautiful or more talent, whatever the thing is that you're looking for. You'll never have enough or be enough until you are satisfied with who you are in Christ, who God made you to be, accepting whatever opportunities may come your way, and then allowing yourself to let go of the rest.
Katelyn, I'm curious if you have any principles of maybe how you use social media that guide how you engage. And I ask because for me, I'm on YouTube, and you got to make a thumbnail that grabs people's attention. Well, there's a line where it's enough to go, ooh, interesting, you got my attention, want to watch that, where it's surprising and alarming and the world is ending and you've never seen this before, or it's just provocative, or attacking somebody else at their expense. You're drawing a following. And I try to say in my mind, how do I appropriately provoke people to engage the content that I think is good, because I have great guests. I wouldn't do it if I think it's valuable. But that's one thing that goes through my mind. And there's probably people that are going to contact me now and go, Sean, what about this video? You fell short. Fine, I'll plead guilty. That's just a principle that I try to operate by. Are there any kind of principles that shape the way you engage social media? So it's like spread a good message, but ultimately not about me, about the message itself.
Yeah, well, I'll just say off the bat, I'm sure you do have to be thinking from a marketing perspective. Wow, you're trying to reach people whose attention spans are like this. So yeah, you would naturally think, well, I have to go with the most provocative or interesting thing. A couple things come to mind. We know that social media is creating disconnect and divides and rancor in our common life. When we argue with people over screens, forgetting that, they're actual people. Our words can be used to curse or to bless. I have definitely made mistakes in that realm in the past. So I think starting off by saying, I'm not going to cater to our baser instincts. I want people to engage for things that I'm offering that are good, true, and beautiful, putting aside kind of questions of marketing, but accepting I don't want to just become whatever is going to get the most clicks, because that is not an ultimate measure of value that you're adding to the world. Otherwise we'd be creating all sorts of ridiculous content all the time to get attention and clicks. And I don't think any of us as leaders, especially as Christian leaders, want to be known for that, or want a kind of ministry or work in the world to be based or founded on that kind of foundation. I think about how people might encounter me in person and never wanting there to be this real disconnect between how they encounter me on social media and how they experience me in person. to not feel like, wow, you're really kind of punchy and angry on the internet. And then if I'm punchy and angry in person, then that's fine, because at least there's integrity. No, I want people to experience a sense of how you show up in the world in these spaces is integrated with who you are in your life off the screen. There's no real surprises there. Of course, I think about taking breaks and how important it can be to, these media are designed expressly as addictive forms of entertainment and consumption.
Yep.
Leaders in Silicon Valley don't let their own children use these media because they think, oh my gosh, we've created these tools that are so profoundly addictive and are shaping us in all sorts of negative ways. So I know some people say, I don't want to be on it. I'm sure you feel like, oh, I need to be in these spaces to some extent as a communicator. But I also try to stay off on the weekends, or in the evenings, just to say there's always a part of my day, my week, maybe longer seasons where I can kind of detox from the endorphin hit that I get every time that someone likes my post, recognizing I don't want to be dependent on that. I don't want to just be posting something to get the endorphin hit from the likes. That's not the kind of life I want to live. So yeah, I absolutely think taking breaks is important as well.
That's great. Those are really helpful ideas, practical things and principles to try to live by. One of the questions that went through my mind, and you talk about this a little bit in your book, is what our obsession as Christians, and in particular evangelical Christians, it reveals about who we are. So one of the things that I think our obsession with two things, with a persecution mindset and with celebrity culture, kind of shows a profound insecurity in our own position, that we're clamoring for attention from others, which to me is just so contrary to what it means to be a Christian and where our confidence should be grounded. So if I was on the outside analyzing evangelical culture, I would probably think we're pretty insecure, amongst other things, in what we say we actually believe. I'm curious what you think our obsession with celebrity culture reveals about kind of the modern state of evangelicalism.
Yeah, well, you've already brought up perceived persecution, so I feel safe in venturing in that direction. And
Do it.
I'm always a little hesitant to, I talk about it in the book, but it can be hard to talk about because I am sympathetic to a large extent with a sense among evangelicals that they've lost cultural power, they've lost political power. They fear a kind of marginalization in society. Some would say, yeah, that's already happening on a legal and cultural scale. All of that said, I do think that perceived sense of fear of loss of power can lead us to attach to people who are essentially strong men, who appear to have a kind of cultural credibility, who might vouch for us in positions or places of power. I think about the phenomenon of cool pastors and cool mega churches, attracting celebrities to their churches. Here in New York, former Hillsong Church literally had a VIP section for celebrities, Justin Bieber and the Kardashians and all of that. And my phone is ringing, so I'm going to stop.
It's probably the news contacting you because you're so big time, Katelyn. If you need to take it, and I'm kidding.
I just want to turn it off so I'm not distracted.
Do it. Turn it off.
I'll be right back.
We'll keep going here. Had to take that opportunity to just gently give Katelyn a hard time. She'll be back, and we will continue this. Just so you know, I'm not editing out. This is all part of the fun to show that you're a real human being.
The funny thing is, I'm almost 100% sure it was a spam call, based
Probably.
on the area code and the name. So the opposite of the news. But yeah, these cool churches kind of expressly trying to attract celebrities. Of course, the pastors are wearing luxury clothing and leather jackets, And all of that, I think, is this attempt to say to a watching world, we can be cool too. We can,
Mm,
go to nightclubs. We can design these really intense, immersive worship experiences. We listen to good music. There's a kind of vying for cultural acceptability that I do think I tend to agree with you. It feels a little trying too hard, or
mm,
a lack of security in one's kind of collective identity in the world. In more traditional church spaces, I think, so many churches and ministries center their work around the celebrity leader because they want a touch point to the sacred or the divine. They want to know God is among us. God is blessing our work. This person seems anointed. They say that they're anointed. They are very charismatic. They're wonderful communicators. More people are coming to our church or connecting to our ministry because of this person's leadership. And if you want, as a Christian, if you want to be part of something that seems big and important in the world,
mm,
um, as you kind of uniquely blessed by God, and this celebrity figure is like leading you there, it's going to attract you and allow you or enable you to kind of overlook some of their character issues or poor
mm,
leadership styles. I think some of this really highlights that we have devalued a sort of ordinary faithfulness, an understanding of Christian faith as a pursuit along what is the Eugene Peterson book? Um,
a long
Obedience.
obedience in the same direction. Is that something like that?
Yes. Yes, a long obedience in the same direction, something that is chosen day in and day out, not because it gets a lot of attention or praise or gets put on social media, but simply because it is an expression of love and faithfulness to God and care for one's neighbor. And again, valuing faithfulness over measurable results, but really believing that
Mm,
that kind of faithful life actually has a transformative effect in the world. It actually matters,
mm,
how we treat our neighbors, how we treat our coworkers, how we love our spouses and our children, how we invest in institutions that are doing good things in the world. All of those things are not flashy, but they really matter,
mm,
to God's work in the world and to creating a society that blesses our neighbors.
mm. So, all these issues that you're raising, there's a flip side way to look at this. So, when my son was about 16, he goes, Dad, if you want to reach my generation, you got to get on TikTok. So, I got on TikTok. He also said to me when he was about 15, he goes, Dad, if a speaker walks on stage with Jordans, I would listen. So,
Mm,
I bought a pair of Jordans. So there's a sense where a lot of evangelicalism, and myself included, when I look at my father, look back this history, it's like, here's these tools.
hmm
Let's use these to effectively reach people today. And I think
hmm
there's something to be said for that. But maybe we could focus a little bit on the person, Billy Graham, who kind of started
mm,
this trend a little bit. And I
hmm
appreciate, by the way, you're so, I think, fair and gracious towards him that you offer some critiques, but do it in
hmm
the exact right spirit that I think should be done. Maybe
hmm
talk a little bit how he kind of started this movement a little bit and some of the great things, but maybe just some of the questions we should ask about
mm,
the nature of evangelicalism that he's so deeply shaped.
hmm Yeah, well, Billy Graham is probably the most famous Christian of the last century, just in terms of the number of people all over the world who heard him preach. He was very almost progressive in his adopting tools of mass media, radio, television. He even dabbled in social media later in his life.
Hmm.
I have no doubt that if Billy Graham were starting his ministry now, he would absolutely be on TikTok. I can't speak to the use of Jordans, but I
Fair
he
enough.
would he would probably be open to it. He just had a very pragmatic understanding of these tools to reach millions of people with the gospel, and he was effective in doing that. One of the reasons I really appreciate Graham is that, to our knowledge, he ended his public ministry without scandal. He
Amen.
was very wise about accountability, about financial transparency. He and his colleagues early in the Crusades, as they were kind of blowing up and tens of thousands of people were coming to these Crusades, they made certain commitments to each other to essentially not let this newfound attention and glory go to their heads. And to my understanding, Graham lived out a very public ministry without any kind of moral scandal. He would later on reflect on his relationships with various presidents and say, oh, I got too involved. I was used by political leaders.
Mm.
But even the fact that he was reflective about that later in life, that he could kind of own up to mistakes or blind spots, just was really refreshing. So I
Mm.
am a fan of Graham. I also think that he was perhaps naive about, again,
Mm.
how these tools of media shape the message that you're providing. I know that he wanted to always try to connect crusade attendees to the local church, but I do tend to think that because of the spectacle and excitement of a crusade, by contrast, life in the local church is going to look a little bit boring. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people, maybe came to Christ at those crusades, but then thought of Graham as the purveyor of their
Mm.
discipleship, of their spiritual growth. And I think even Graham would say, no, you really need to be in the local church, but that's just not going to seem as exciting as listening to this dynamic, charismatic speaker. I do think that he tried to befriend Hollywood celebrities. He appeared on these talk shows, again, going back to that cultural credibility angle. But I do wonder if there were ways that because he was trying to be all things to all people, there were certain either kind of moral or political stances that he actually needed to take, knowing that he would probably lose some of his
Mm.
followers, and he
Mm.
didn't. I think there's
Mm.
something about the impulse to likability that can actually work against living out the full Christian gospel and all of its kind of moral teachings in the public square, because you don't want to upset potential followers or
Mhm.
attendees. And that's something that all of us have to kind of discern with God for ourselves. But I think even Graham would say there were certain things that I should have said earlier on that I didn't, because I wanted to be liked. I wanted people to listen to me. And therefore, I didn't say things that needed to be said, even though I might have offended some of the people in the crowd.
Mhm. That's great. Such good questions, and I think fair wisdom to reflect upon his impact on evangelicalism and beyond. You mentioned in the book that you think most people go into ministry, whether it's being a pastor, being a speaker, an author, with good motives. But you kind
Mm-hmm.
of describe this death by a thousand cuts, without using this term, this very slow process where it ends up often leading to the kind of abuse that you describe in the book that sadly
Mm-hmm.
we've seen so frequently in the news and beyond. What is that
Mm-hmm.
process where somebody kind of walk us through step by step what can happen, if anything, as an awareness, but a warning from going down
Mm-hmm.
that ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in these stories of fallen leaders, the result is often the same, but the path, there might be some kind of patterns, but it's going to be a little bit different for each person. I do think there is something about knowing that a church or organization thinks of you as kind of crucial to the mission. If your church members or your organization says, we cannot exist without you. We can't imagine our life without your leadership, without you at the helm. I mean, how is that not going to go to your head a little bit? Like, that's going to feel really good if my colleagues in book publishing said, Brazos Press would not exist without Katelyn. I mean, wow. Like, of course I'm going to internalize that. Thankfully, they don't say that, and thankfully that's not true. But you can kind of absorb that sense, whether it's stated overtly or people treat you as such, as, wow, I really am central to what God is doing in this church. I tend to think, going to structures of accountability, most of these, stories of fallen pastors, of course, they would have said, yes, we have elder boards, we have board of directors. Yes, accountability is a value that we talk about here. I tend to think a pastor should not be responsible for selecting their own elder board or board of directors, that cuts against the very notion of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So something happens in these accountability structures where the people who are theoretically supposed to be able to kind of speak the hard word or see blind spots or speak the truth in love, which we all need people who do that. They don't want to provide that. They're not able to provide that. You have people who are kind of being consolidated around the lead pastor's mission or vision or persona. So you have accountability in name, but not always in interpersonal dynamics. I tend to think that there can be a lack of transparency over time. For example, in the story of Willow Creek, all church staff except for Bill Hybels had to use a public email server. And yet he kind of received special privileges or a special arrangement with the IT department to work on a private email server. Ravi Zacharias, had multiple cell phones, and no one on staff was apparently allowed to review them or kind of get data from them. So a kind of secrecy, lack of transparency. Of course, this can happen with lack of financial transparency. That you have somebody working on the budget who's maybe not going to mention that, in fact, you use some church funds to fund a sabbatical, which is really like a very lavish 3-week vacation paid entirely by tithe money.
Sure.
So transparency, kind of hiding behind certain measures. And then you have people not asking really good questions or not able to ask really good questions. In a lot of these stories, unfortunately, not all of them, but in a lot of them, you see the person start to just really lash out. There's a kind of anger that bubbles up. And we could say, that's stress. That's somebody being overworked. If you think you're essential to the mission, you're probably going to be overworked. But it kind of, I tend to think that we don't take that kind of unrighteous anger seriously enough as a red flag. And I say this as someone who, of course, gets irritated and has lashed out at people I love. But if it's a kind of pattern of, we just know that Pastor so-and-so is going to blow up when he hears that this is what we're doing or whatever, that's concerning. I think that anger kind of reveals a need to have control over other people, a need for things to go your way, and not having a tamed tongue, which is something we can all work on, but is, essential for people in spiritual leadership.
I think kind of to sum up some of the key points you say is what really happens is someone starts to believe the lie, like just to believe the hype that their time, their life, their thoughts are more important than others. And then it becomes about them being served rather than others. So I think that those are such good points. Now, I don't know if I'd say it surprised me, but being that you've written books and you work in the book publishing, you discourage people, or at least can't encourage them from writing a book. And I find a question I get frequently from young people. Sometimes I've literally walked off stage and people will say things like, I want to be a speaker like you. How do I become a speaker? And my question is always, tell me why you want to become a speaker. And I've actually tried to discourage people, because if they're really gifted and called by the Lord, then I'm not going to be able to discourage them. But chances are they look up and think, wow, if you're on stage, you matter. Being on stage and numbers equals influence. We do the same with social media. If I have more followers, that equals significance, that equals influence. And that's not the case. Now, for similar but also additional reasons, you discourage people from writing a book. Tell us your reasons why.
I guess I'm just a mean editor. But also, I love to crush people's dreams. No, I would say I discourage most people from writing a book because I think, similar to what you just identified, people see often a book as a means to the end instead of a kind of work, a creative work that is worth doing in and of itself. So they think if I have a contracted book, then I will have a sense of significance, following, influence that I
Mm.
believe I need to have in order to impact the people around me. Um, and I would just say, as is public speaking, writing is a craft. It's really hard work. It's not glamorous. Writing this book, people would ask, "Oh, what was your process?" Well, sitting in my apartment alone over the weekends when my friends were out, gallivanting around New York, like trying to focus, turning off social media. Like, it's hard work. And it is not a means to an end if you're thinking, this is how I can have influence. I think if you're great at TikTok, you should just be great at TikTok. You don't have to
Mm.
add book author as a form
Mm.
of kind of vouching or credibility. Um, Unless you're really, invested in the craft of writing itself. And here I would actually, I criticize book publishers in my book, in part because I think over time we've tended to communicate to author hopefuls, you don't actually have to be able to write. You don't actually have to have
Mm-hmm.
original ideas, a timely topic. You don't have to have kind of originality of thought. You can just kind of throw together some stories, and with enough kind of marketing and promotional work, we know that we can sell enough copies because you have so many social media followers. And I just think, why create a book? Like, the world doesn't need more books in it. The world needs
Mm.
more good books in it. And actually, only a certain number of people can write a good book. And so part of it is just me wanting to preserve the value of writing and actually encourage people to communicate using media that they're good at, and just
Mm.
recognizing not everybody is good at communicating through a book.
Two last questions for you. One is, do you think there's a connection between a lot of the deconversion stories we've heard recently and celebrity culture, Christian celebrity culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the deconversion trend that we're seeing probably has a lot of um, components and entry points into the general trend. I would say it is absolutely the case that for people who were raised in a church where the lead pastor misused their power in some way, was
Mm.
not living a life of integrity, kind of presented themselves to be this way on stage, and then behind closed doors were doing things unchristianly, that's absolutely going to affect um, the perceived credibility of the messages that they were presenting. Like, I put my trust in you as a pastor, spiritual leader, and in fact, instead of using your leadership to bless others, you used it to lord over others. And maybe if that's true, how can I believe the other things that you shared with me? So I think that's part of it.
Mm.
I also just wonder if, part of the deconversion story is people recognizing that a church community that caters to their felt needs and is primarily oriented around entertainment and consumption and feeling good is actually not what we want, on a deep level. There's a kind of, if I've been exposed to a shallow form of Christianity, it's going to be easy to kind of walk away from it because it never took root. I mean, there's a biblical parable here. Like, if my seeds of faith were planted in shallow ground, many things can come along and blow it away and prevent growth. And I wonder if the celebrity culture in the church, people recognize this is a shallow form of
Mm.
presenting Christian teaching. This is so oriented around felt needs and entertainment, and it's not meeting deep needs, and so I'm gonna walk away from it because it just doesn't serve me, anymore.
Very fair. And I appreciate you discuss that connection in the book. And it gives those of us who have platforms, big or small, added responsibility just to think about how we steward that.
Mm.
Last question. I asked you this before, Katelyn. I kind of want you to speak through me to the audience, so to speak. I don't
Mm.
think of myself as a celebrity Christian. I really don't, for different reasons, but probably in a lot of people's minds, they'd say, well, you write books, you got a YouTube channel,
Hmm.
and whatever, get recognized, going different places, which is fine. But what
Hmm.
would you say if you and I sat down and I said, Katelyn, God's been giving me this platform. What
Mm.
questions would you ask me to make sure I
Mm.
use it well? Speak
Hmm.
through me to the audience if you're sitting
Hmm.
down just having a cup of coffee.
Hmm. Yes. I'm offering spiritual direction to you over coffee. And one thing I would ask is, when you think about the future and a future in which you do not have a YouTube channel, you don't have book deals, you don't have people recognizing you across campus or wherever you're going, how does that make you feel? Like, does it create anxiety? Does it create fear? Maybe it creates relief. Maybe there's a sense of, oh,
Mm,
I can just kind of go about a normal life without having to think about this platform and following thing. Um, but just asking internally, do I have a healthy detachment from all of this? Could I let it go? Could I walk away from it if God led me away from it? That would be one
mm,
question. Another question would be, okay, a lot of people know you as the Sean McDowell. Maybe they don't say the, but they know you as Sean McDowell, the author, the speaker, the apologist. Who just knows you as Sean? And I shouldn't
mm,
even say just, because that makes it sound like it's less than, but who
mm,
knows you as Sean apart from all the other, very good things that you're doing in the world? Do you feel known and seen by those people? And if so, are you investing in those relationships? I have to
mm,
check this on a regular basis in my own life. How much time am I spending interacting with people online and kind of curating a platform or doing the work to get the word out about my writing? And how much am I invested in a real conversation with friends after church over brunch, or a weekly Bible study? Am I allowing myself to show up in spaces where that's not the main thing I'm bringing to the table? I'm showing up just as Katelyn. I would say, this is a little bit of a harder question, but I think I brought it up in our podcast interview. You know, who can say the hard word to you if need be? Are there people in your life who can speak the truth in love? Have you intentionally allowed people in your life to name your blind spots, to, if need be, say, hey, Sean, I think you're like getting a little too fixated on this YouTube numbers thing. We don't know if that's healthy, whatever it is, or, you're choosing the provocative statements
mm,
when you're trying to market these videos. But yeah, people who can, in love, because they care about you, again, as Sean, and they care about the integrity of your work, can ask the hard questions, even though it never feels good to have people ask hard questions. Um, and then I think finally I would just ask about your experience in the local church.
mm,
Are you in a spiritual community where, again, you can participate as a member? I have found it very life-giving to be in churches where I don't have to lead or perform. Sometimes I'm asked to, do a Sunday school talk or something, and that's fine. But because I am in a professional Christian space, I actually
mm,
need places where that is not my mindset, where it is, I want to connect with God and with other Christians, um, putting all of that aside, because so much of my life is spent in the professional Christian space. And that can make you really cynical, and it can make you
mm.
kind of forget why you're in this space to begin with. So yeah, I would ask you about your experience in the local church.
I love it. Thanks for those questions. I've been thinking about them a lot since our last interview a couple months ago. So many more questions for you, but want to respect your time. Maybe we'll do a follow up at some point. To our viewers again, pick up Katelyn's book, Celebrities for Jesus. It's called Celebrities for Jesus. It's excellent. You don't necessarily try to fix everything, but I think you ask the right questions that anybody using social media these days needs to ask. So we appreciate you coming on. The rest of you, make sure you hit subscribe. We've got some other interviews coming up you won't want to miss. And if you thought about studying apologetics with me at Biola, we have a fully online program, top rated. There's information below. We would love to help equip you to serve in your local church. Katelyn, thanks so much for taking time coming on. Thanks for giving up your weekends to write a book. I've personally benefited from a ton, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, great conversation, Sean. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet.